Well, hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jennifer Wardell. I'm the Executive Director of Just Lead Washington, and hopefully you're here today to join us for what is part 2 of our Adaptive Leadership webinar series, which is being offered jointly between Just Lead Washington, Majors Leadership, and Reverb DEI. And this part 2 is going to be covering leading teams through times of isolation. And before we get started with further introductions in this session, just wanted to do a couple of housekeeping items. We'll try to be quick because we've got a lot to cover today. The first is just to note that this is a webinar format, so it's not as interactive as we would like, but we'll have to have folks rely, for the most part, on your chat box to submit questions. And we are happy to take questions and comments throughout, and we will also be taking some time at the end for additional questions and can open it up to phone listeners or folks who don't have access to the chat box. If you do have the chat function, go ahead and try to open that up. You should find the option to chat at the bottom of your screen and open that up, say hello, maybe let us know where you work. And also, if you're willing, maybe share one thing that's been challenging about working with your team and colleagues since this time of crisis and physical distancing has started. I also want to point out that there's a Q&A function as well. So if you want to submit a question anonymously, for example, you can go ahead also on the bottom of your screen. We'll find a Q&A option and you can ask a question there. We're also trying something new today by doing some live transcript access. So I'll share out a link in the chat box for folks who want access to the transcript as we're talking, and we'll be sharing out that transcript as well as a video recording of the session, and any slides and resources will be provided at the after the end of the session to anyone who is registered. So I am gonna get that, bear with us for 1 minute as I get the transcript going. Oops. And I'm gonna populate this link into the chat box. This is a new function for us as we're trying to make our programs more accessible. And again, my name is Jen Wardell. I'm the ED of Just Lead Washington. A lot of you participating today are already familiar with Just Lead, so I'll be quick. Just by way of background, Just Lead offers training, consulting, coaching, and space for learning and collaboration, particularly to support those who work within and are impacted by the law and justice systems, and those who are striving to position the law and justice systems as a tool for more equitable systems change. Our efforts intentionally center leadership development, racial equity and equity, as well as collaboration between legal and community partners. KJ, do you want to take a minute and introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is KJ Williams, and I am one of the leadership and equity consultants with Just Lead. Been with Just Lead for about 6, almost 7 months now after managing the diversity and equity inclusion work for the Washington State Bar Association for 9 years. In addition to that, I am the owner and founder of Rise with KJ, which is an independent consultant firm where I provide leadership and equity consultants and coaching. And yeah, so that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you. We're hearing lots from KJ today. And I'm going to get us started. Just a little bit of background on the series that we're offering. So this is a multi-part workshop series that's our attempt to provide something that's responsive to the unprecedented and difficult times that we're all operating in due to COVID-19. And our first session in April focused on ways that we can care for ourselves, and we'll be referring back to that session today, and I would encourage you to check that out. We have the recording and slides available on our website. And today we'll dive into what it takes to lead and work with teams during this time. So our goals are to talk sort of in 2 parts of the same whole, to talk a little bit about what it means to manage and lead teams virtually, as well as what these relationships look like, particularly in times of crisis, that kind of human element of working in teams. So we'll offer some technical tips and lessons learned, but also it will dive a little bit into what the role of leaders are in supporting teams through times of crisis and surfacing really makes this also hard, hopefully offering some strategies to help us manage that. We have a few slides to share, but mostly you get to hear, or from us. We're not going to make this too technical. And the first piece that we'd like to talk to are kind of diving into a few core components of managing and supporting team and really what they look like in times of crisis and virtual operations. So if you've done work with our partners at the Shriver Center on Poverty Law, you might be familiar with their, they have a course called Supervising for Quality and Impact. And in that course, they talk about the core supervisory functions being support, education, and quality assurance. A lot of what we're going to talk about today really kind of centers around the support function of leaders and supervisors, because that's a role that has a kind of an outsized importance right now. And also want to just acknowledge the time that we're in, because it really can't be overstated how unprecedented and overwhelming the time that we're operating is. And can't be said enough. And if you're leading in relationship with others, make sure that that does not go unsaid. We're not working from home. We're working remotely during a crisis. And, we hear articles and people talk about those of us with kids too. We're not homeschooling. We're crisis schooling right now. So we're all experiencing levels and different types of trauma and anxiety that's showing up very differently for everyone. So I would encourage you, just as we talk and as you're doing your work, don't assume that your normal is anyone else's normal or your team's normal, and we'll kind of dive into what that might mean in different contexts as we talk. And the first function that we want to dive into today that kind of looks and feels really differently right now is communication. There's a piece of this that's really around tools and resources. And by now, hopefully you're getting a little bit used to using remote working tools. You may have done some experimentation, you may have failed and tried again, and you're probably working with lots of folks who are experiencing yourself some feelings of fatigue. Like we're thrilled that any of you are actually joining us today after the number of Zoom meetings and video conferences you're probably involved in. And as we're thinking about tools and resources, we want to ask a few key questions and really engage our teams in these conversations. First about was just simply, what tools do we need in order to communicate effectively? So that covers things like video conferencing, calling for internal and external meetings. And it sounds like folks are getting more and more familiar with options like Zoom and Microsoft Teams. Others are even using things like Google Hangouts or even like FaceTime. And the good old-fashioned telephone. And we also have a heavier reliance right now on written communication, which means that there's needs that are surfacing around things like internal communication, as well as information and file sharing. So we're not going to go into details about each option or which option is right for you, but I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to take a moment and confirm first, what does your team already have access to? This could be existing communications and information sharing strategies. Is it working well for everyone? If not, what potential other strategies might be a good fit? So for example, if folks are starting to feel overwhelmed and people stop responding to emails, what are some of the other communication options you might want to look at, like something like Slack or Microsoft Teams? Or if you've been emailing files back and forth and things are getting lost, consider what are some of the more secure and easily accessible ways you can manage information and documents like Dropbox or OneDrive or Google Docs. This is kind of an opportunity for us to get really creative and try things out, but also try not to over-engineer your solutions either. It's really not worth any investment of time or resource if people don't use the product. Also want to stress that it's really important to keep equity considerations in mind as you're thinking about how to communicate and provide resources to your team. Do your team members have the equipment and the subscriptions they need to do their jobs? Who's paying? Things like software licensing, hardware like laptops, equipment for home workspaces for folks who are not accustomed to working from home are expensive. If folks are using their cell phones, are you contributing towards their data plans? There's lots of considerations that we want to take in as we're exploring what our options are for communication and collaboration. Also really need to be thinking about whether our meetings and our use of technology is accessible to our teams and to our clients and partners. We know that for some, having virtual options kind of actually levels the playing field. there's lots of places who have kind of main offices that are centered all of the time, yet have folks working remotely who feel sort of isolated. And now we all feel isolated, for much certainly for worse, but it's a different experience. And some of the physical burden is obviously alleviated for folks who have some physical and health limitations. But then on the other side of it, lots of folks, visual impairments and lots of other issues that folks may be experiencing, things like video conferences are extremely challenging. So we want to be able to ask our team just some really key questions. How is this going? Ask, what do you need? Hey, I've noticed we've been trying this video conferencing thing for a while. Is this working for you? Do we want to move things to phone? What is working for you? And really bring your team into deciding what makes sense for how the team can communicate. And we also want to think about, if folks aren't aware, there's lots of access to free and discounted tools. Those of you who are working at nonprofits, hopefully you know about resources like TechSoup, TechSoup.org. They have not only lots and lots of discounts available for software and some hardware, but there's also lots of great training resources there. And also just think about vendors and companies that you are working with or want to work with, and find out if there's any discounts you can access as well. Many are just offering them because of this crisis that we're in. That's the most technical I want to get right now, but didn't want to skip over the tools piece. And as we're thinking about communication, it's also not just in the form of meetings with the team and meetings with the client. There's also a lot of informal communication that's really essential to the daily operations and relationship building that happens in an office environment. So we need to be able to create ways that replace that kind of informal communication that would typically happen. There's lots of ways to do that. I'm curious to hear from you all about the ways that you're engaging in informal communication. So just some strategies that we're hearing are even just increasing some meeting frequencies, team meetings and one-on-ones. A lot of folks, I know, certainly I could speak for myself and having to juggle parenting and school responsibilities. I can meet, but I can't meet for very long. So just scheduling more and shorter meetings. There's also really lots of fun and sort of interesting ways to informally communicate. Like one lower tech way is that, for example, our team communicates at the beginning of a week over email, just to share, here's what we're working on, here's the questions I have. Folks are keeping chat functions up, like if you have Google Chats or through Teams or some of the team sites, you can kind of just keep the chat function open to be able to just create ways for folks to do the sort of virtual pop-in, like, hey, I have a quick question, I don't want to have to call or email. If you're using something like Slack, which some people love and some people struggle with, but Slack, for folks who know it, there's channels that you can create. So there may be some specific project communication, but you can also even just create like an informal, quote unquote, water cooler channel and keep the lines open for some informal communication. Some folks are even doing sort of virtual co-working sessions where you might keep up something open, even your phone line open with a coworker, maybe even on mute, but just kind of have that open like you're working and sharing a space with them. One tip I wanted to mention was that for a lot of people, this prioritizing informal communication is not necessarily natural. For introverts, for folks who are overwhelmed, there's some people who are sort of thriving and having more time to themselves. But on the other hand, for others, this is really the lifeline for verbal processing and collaboration. So again, just want to reiterate, I can't tell you what's exactly right for you necessarily, but reiterate the importance of asking and talking with your team and co-creating something that works for everyone. Some other just quick strategies. Gauge how much social interaction folks are needing and wanting. We don't want to skip over that piece entirely, even when people are overwhelmed. The goals here in having these lines of communication open is continued relationship building and collaboration, and we can do our work better when we are in collaboration with others. So we want to be able to still stay human, and there's lots of great things. We'll share out some resources about ways that you can engage folks in a social way in your meetings, but also recognize that folks might be completely over the social aspect of things like, doing like Zoom happy hours. And again, just talk to your team about it. Definitely make sure to make your conversations meaningful, in that human connection way, and be productive, but we have a culture, most of our workplaces, often have meetings, particularly standing meetings for the sake of meeting. And this is not the time to kind of jam pack folks' schedules unless things are really critical. Again, folks may not have the same capacity. No one has the same capacity right now, whether you are caring for family members or not. The level of self-management and other management that we're all engaging in right now is limiting our capacity to work. And we don't have access to all the tools and resources we need. So just really honor that as you're asking things of folks and engaging with others. Like, no one has enough capacity, and 2-hour meetings are not going to work right now virtually. And so, like I said, we'll share out some articles about strategies for engaging virtually and making virtual meetings as engaging and meaningful as possible. So we'll share that out afterward. And the key is maintaining relationship and connection, really. And so again, a lot of what we're centering today is that support function of managing humans, but also want to acknowledge that these other core functions are continuing to be relevant, around education and quality assurance. And just want to put in a plug that over the next few months, Just Lead will be putting out some curriculum and workshop offerings that are more directly about these core supervision functions. So stay tuned for that. And wanted to flag that on the sort of quality assurance side, many managers are really worried about what accountability looks like in a remote environment. Like it's harder to tell how people are spending their time, what folks are working on. And in these instances, clear and consistent communication is really critical, particularly as you operate remotely, so that you can generate some accountability and follow through. But I want to emphasize, cannot stress enough, that the orientation of these conversations needs to be about goals and outcomes, not about tasks or time management. This is not the time to be micromanaging adult humans, and we need to be able to offer as much trust and flexibility as possible. People's schedules are really funky right now, and people's anxiety can be surfacing in ways. I know certainly for me, like I'm not operating at my best right now, and my anxiety is going to come through in worrying about what everyone else is doing and what I can control and what I can't control. And it's hard to manage that. But I love this. There's a quote from the Know Your Team website. It's knowyourteam.com, and we'll share out a couple of their resources later as well. This is really simple. It says, effective remote leadership, or leadership period for that matter, is trusting that the team you picked and hired and you chose can follow through on the job. So we do need to continue to support our teams in generating goals and generating work plans, but we also want to keep some kind of broad questions in mind. Let me move to here. This is one of Know Your Teams. This is a couple of the questions that they suggest that folks ask as you're managing teams remotely. So in addition to just kind of like, what have you got going on? Where do you need support? Some high level questions. Do you have what you need to do your job well? How can I support you to create an environment that helps you do your best work? We'll share these out. And another example, and I apologize, I can't remember which article it's from, but I'll try to dig it out. There's an example of folks using something like a Friday email checkout, which just says things like, here's what I did this week. Here are the things I'm really excited about. Here's what concerns I have or questions, what I'm thinking about. Here's what my priorities are for the coming week, and here's what I need from you, my manager. Just kind of simple ways that keep your team in control of what they're working on and how they get their work done, but that keep the channels of communication open for folks to be able to do their best work. And again, when you can co-create the expectations and processes with your team instead of just for your team, you'll be able to generate more buy-in and trust between everyone involved. So ask your team what they need to be successful, and make sure you're also clearly articulating what you need from them as well. I know we're going pretty fast, and I see it will hopefully, KJ, if you're able to kind of peek at the Q&A that might be coming in, and then I'll take that over when I hand the baton in a couple minutes. Just a couple last pieces from me. The last piece of communication is just acknowledging that there are these more formal processes that are continuing to happen, things like performance reviews, hiring, and onboarding. These are just inevitably sort of ongoing and can be more challenging when we're working remotely. But also, on the other hand, we don't want to avoid these processes entirely. In fact, some folks are in the position where they really need to ramp up, for example, hiring to respond to some of the urgent needs. We also don't want this to kind of pile up when we quote unquote return to our new normal. So there's not a magic way to do this, but it's worth investing some time in thinking really about what processes are not just urgent, but what processes are most important and helpful and needed in the moment, and make sure we're not just carrying out things for the sake of doing business as usual. But on the other hand, there's some conversations that really are harder when they're not in person. But don't use the situation we're in to kind of avoid having difficult conversations. That's particularly given the ways in which communication can be mistranslated in, email and writing, or when you're not face to face with someone. These things can kind of pile up and get worse as time goes on. So if you need to provide feedback to one of your team members, find a way to do it. Assume that any of those kinds of processes, these are all possible virtually. You can host a feedback session. You can certainly continue to conduct job interviews, but just don't assume that they're going to necessarily look the same. So for example, you may want to generate an online survey to solicit feedback about an employee, do a sort of mini 360-degree review. You may want to talk to your hiring committee about what types of biases and assumptions might come through and surface if you're interviewing someone by videos from home. So again, like everything else, I was sort of repeating the same theme. Engage the people who are involved with these processes and co-creating the process to try and create something that works for everyone. Last couple of pieces really quickly. Collaboration and coordination kind of come together, and there's certainly an overlap about, the ways we communicate, the reasons we communicate are for collaboration and coordination purposes. But wanted to note just a few key strategies for things like collaborating on projects and assignments. There are lots and lots of tools out there, things like, again, like Slack, like Microsoft Teams. Folks have some success with project management resources like Trello and Asana. There's other resources also for some of the attorney-specific challenges that are coming through about secure case files and things like that we can share at resources to as needed. Again, try things out. What works for one team works terribly for another. Out of the things I've listed, I think we've tried just about everything over the last couple of years, and we've had limited success with some. And sometimes it's about not over-engineering the solution. And like people don't like tools that they don't understand or that are hard to use. And if you do commit to using a tool for collaboration, be patient. There's a change management component to implementing things like new technology. If you're familiar with any other change management strategies, those things come into play here too. So make sure your folks understand the value in the change or the new thing that you're suggesting that they engage in, and also be sure to invest in the training and practice that's needed to get folks comfortable so they really understand the tools that they're using. I would also recommend creating what we might call virtual rules of engagement. Like with communication, establishing upfront how you will interact and engage with your team is really critical. This may look different than in person, but you can still create some shared expectations. For example, letting folks know when you are quote unquote out of the office or not available, or setting an expectation that creating documents and files should be saved in shared locations so that other folks have access to it. There's some good examples of things if you are really digging into the technical side of it. There's templates and samples of remote work agreements and technology agreements that places like TechSoup provide access to. They can be some helpful tools to just make sure that folks understand what is needed and expected from them. Also encourage you to make some regular time on your calendars for doing some reflection and evaluation about all of this new stuff you might be trying out. Um, and that creates some space for responding and shifting to situations as they come up and for adapting. Give yourself permission to shift your priorities and to change potentially how you're spending your time and how you're engaging with other folks as this crisis unfolds. If you've read some of the Just Lead's blog articles, there's different phases of responding to a crisis environment like the one that we're in, and what folks need is not going to be the same over time. And finally, on collaboration, if you're feeling isolated, overwhelmed by engaging online, take some time to think about what energizes you, what inspires you. For a lot of folks, that is your team, your amazing, amazing team. So think about who inspires you and who you want to engage with. That's certainly like my team gives me a ton of energy. And think about what are the ways you can find to strengthen some of the key relationships. And the last piece before handing off that baton is a good segue, I think, to what KJ is going to talk about for our second half, is just acknowledging culture. There's, even if we're not operating in person with one another, there still is team culture being created. There's still organizational culture. And by that, we mean sort of the spoken and unspoken norms and expectations, ways of being, those rules of engagement that I mentioned. These infuse all of our interactions, including remote ones. As a leader, you do have an outsized role in creating culture with your team, and that is covers kind of the expectations that you're either proactively or passively setting for others, as well as what you're modeling. Which we mentioned in the first part of our series, practicing vulnerability is really valuable, ideally without completely oversharing. But things like naming the dynamics that are coming up and that this is a crisis environment. Don't pretend everything's okay. It's not. Still keep your filters on so that you're not burdening team members with every worry you might be carrying, but really honor the experiences that folks are having. And if you are modeling a sort of icy veneer and that nothing's getting to you, folks will not necessarily feel the comfortable sharing what's really going on with them. A key piece of culture that we're seeing right now that's a challenge for folks is this idea of productivity and overwork, and what expectations should we set for ourselves during this time. This is a sprint and a marathon that we're engaging with, and our community is going to be experiencing the impact of this and of the primary and secondary trauma we're experiencing for years to come. We can't sacrifice our teams and ourselves in ways that will damage our ability to sustain ourselves for the long haul. And we also don't want to make sure we're not sacrificing the psychological safety of our teams. By that, I mean, like, team members, this is a term that we're seeing more and more. Psychological safety is that the team members feel that they won't be exposed to interpersonal or other harm if they actually engage in learning behaviors like asking for help, asking for feedback, acknowledging mistakes, pointing out problems. If folks aren't engaged in meetings and conversations, if they're not highlighting the things that are not going well, ask yourself how you might be contributing to that environment. And an antidote to that, and to a lot of this, is creating instead a culture of appreciation. How can you let your team know? How can you let your individual colleagues know how valued and respected they are, especially during this really challenging time? With that, I think I'm going to actually take a breath and transition to KJ. I will admit that I am particularly bad with keeping an eye on chat and Q&A when there's screen sharing going on, so I apologize if I have missed stuff. KJ, before you dive in, are there questions or comments that folks have surfaced that are worth bringing into the space right now?
Well, I will. There is a request to put the Know Yourself link in the chat box, and I couldn't access it quickly through the
Sure.
PowerPoint. So if you could do that, and then further up in the chat box, people were answering, giving ideas on the platforms that they're using. And one thing that's important, I don't know if I can find it again, but someone mentioned the challenges in remote areas with internet connectivity, which we're all aware of. So they said that what works is using the phone, Jabber, and email. So I think those are important to mention.
Great, thank you for sharing.
All right, so looks like it is in my hands. All right, so hello again, everyone. Jen provided us with lots and lots of fantastic information that we can use to apply in various forms based on who we are and the type of team that we're managing, so that remote supervision happens a little easier for us. Excuse me. And so we're going to shift just a little bit here because one of the things that Jen ended with, one of the phrases was creating a culture of appreciation. And so if you think about the amount of work that you yourself are responsible for, and then intersect that with the team members that you have supervision responsibility for, and then intersect that again with their work product that ultimately you have responsibility for overseeing or for supervising. And then another intersection with the overall context, the contextual environment that we're all living in, right? That large macro context that we're dealing with given the pandemic, as well as the political and the social challenges that we're all navigating. That's a lot. And that's just a brief list. That's not an exhaustive list, right? So representative list of all of the not necessarily just challenges, but all of the items that we have to navigate, that we have to reflect on, that we have to find answers for, and all of the people that we have some level of responsibility for. And we're talking about you, right? So we're talking about you right now as an individual, as a human who is managing other humans. And I think it's important that while we have all of these great tools to use, that the application of those tools, the decision around how we use those tools and which tools we decide to choose are really going to be rooted and anchored in who we are, what works best for us, and what we're managing ourselves in our own personal and professional life. And so I think that often we as supervisors and managers can get lost in the midst of everything that needs to be done, that our individual needs, both our individual professional needs and our individual personal needs, are constantly being asked to take a back seat so that we can show up well, so that we can provide the type of supervision that is healthy and that's effective for the teams that we're leading. And so we want to talk a little bit about how to ensure our own sustainability through this time as a supervisor or manager with just exponential areas of responsibility that we have to navigate. All right, so can we, I'm not actually pushing the slides. Jen is doing that for me. I happen to love Dilbert. And so you'll see that little cartoon there. And I want to talk about, again, the macro and the micro context that we're living within right now. And recognizing, and I'm sure that many of us we've been reading all kinds of things. We've been listening to all kinds of videos. We've been in different types of meetings, and we're hearing dialogue around grief and going through the stages of grief, right? And all of us are going through various stages of grief. But one of the things that I came across recently was, and many of you may already be aware, but that there is a sixth stage of grief. And I was not aware of this, but I think it's important because it talks about finding meaning in that process of grief. So after we've gone through the denial and the anger and the bargaining, and then wrestling with depression and getting to a place of acceptance, there is this idea or this push to find meaning. Now, I should also mention that I think we understand that grief is not linear, that it has ebbs and flows. And, you know, this week we may be in a place of denial. This can't be happening. I can't believe that this is the change that the pandemic is bringing into my life. And the following week, we may be in a place of acceptance, but we may go back to denial again. And then we may have to wrestle with depression. And so one of the things that we want to begin to surface for ourselves is this recognition that as we're navigating all these various stages, that at each stage, we actually have the opportunity when we can find it within ourselves to do it, to find meaning. And by finding meaning, what we're talking about is looking for the opportunity to bring light into an otherwise dark situation. And that is not something that I am presenting as an easy task. It takes intentionality, and often it takes being reminded by other people, whether that's through something we're reading or that we're listening to, that the light will again shine. And this is important, especially for humans who are leading other humans, because as I said earlier, we tend to get lost in the fray. We're so busy focusing on showing up well, taking care of our teams. And for many of us, as a matter of fact, I'd love to see how many of you have children at home, or you have extended caregiving responsibilities outside of yourself. Right? And so that's another element that impacts our ability to show up well. And so I'm trying to paint this picture of the often immense burdens that supervisors and managers are under, but often not expected to talk about. And what we want to do today is provide an opportunity to talk about those things. So so can you go to the next slide, Jen? And I'm trying to keep an eye on the time as well. Okay, so what I'd like for you to reflect on right now is what has been the underlying current for you this week? So I can share with you that this week, and we're at Thursday already, I have been consistently tired and my attention span has been extremely short. Now, put yourself in that position as a supervisor or manager, and if you have been extremely tired all week and your attention, I see someone said that apathy, yes, balancing kids, homeschooling, taking care of parents, I want you to consider that you have all these things that are happening for you, and whatever that underlying current has been for you this week, that underlying current is actually finding its way into the dialogues that you're having, the interactions that you're engaging in, the way that the language that you use in your emails, your responses to colleagues, your responses to your staff, right? And so we want to be mindful of where we are as much as possible, not because we have to jump through hoops so that we can change that on a dime, but because if we can raise our awareness about it, then we do a much better job of mitigating the impact or the negative impact that we can have on our staff. And so the second question I would ask is, where are you at today? Right now, today. What is it that is giving you life today, and what is it that feels like a huge challenge that you wish would just disappear for you? So we want to take a look at those things that are happening, that consistent underlying current that's happening for us throughout the week, as well as day to day. How am I feeling today? Sometimes I can tell you that as an introvert who has consistently worked in extroverted positions, that I often wake up and the last thing I want to do is talk to anyone. I don't want to engage. I don't want to have a meeting. I don't even want to write an email if I think you're going to respond today. And I can wake up and feel like that, but if I have the responsibility of supervising or managing other people, then I don't necessarily get to take care of myself in the way that my entire insides are telling me that I need to. And that's important for us as supervisors and managers to be aware of, so that, again, we can mitigate the impact, but also so that we can identify a time, literally schedule a time for yourself to be with yourself, to address the internal needs that you have, so that you can show up well, so that you can make good decisions, so that you can facilitate these meetings, so that you can decide what's going to be the best tool, what is the best strategy for my team to engage in at this time. And then the last question is, in general, what is the most difficult emotion or feeling for you to acknowledge? And I'm trying to read as well, so Jen, you can stop me whenever if there's something that I should address in the chat box. But what is the most difficult emotion or feeling for you to acknowledge? And the reason that I ask that is, again, yes, our own self-awareness, but also if we can be really honest with ourselves, then we have a much better chance of creating the space for that type of authenticity and honesty that is needed for staff to actually show up and say, this is what's going on. And that intersects with what Jen provided earlier in terms of being able to show up and say, I need help. Like, I really don't understand this. This tool is not working for me. And know that they're going to get the support that they need, that their feelings or the experience that they're having won't be demonized, it won't be minimized, and it won't be pushed aside. And so when we can anchor ourselves in the reality of our own lives, then it is much easier for us to develop the type of empathy and create the space necessary for our staff to do the same thing. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right, we're moving right along. Excuse me. All right, so here we're going to talk about expansion versus contraction and mindfulness. Now, well, before I do that, actually, I want to go back to, well, you don't have to go back to the slide, but I want to talk a little bit more about the grief. I realize, so, you know, we're going to think life is not going to be the same, and we know this, but we don't necessarily know what the landscape is going to look like when we get to the other side of this. And by to the other side of this, I mean, there are going to be stages to the other side of this, right? Because we're coming out of the stay-at-home order in phases, which means that's going to directly impact for many of us how we stage our return to the physical work environment. And for some of us, that may be dramatically different. And so recognizing before we get to that place that the feelings of grief, navigating the stages of grief, that these things are not just going to go away, but that these are emotions that and experiences that we're going to have to manage throughout this time, right? Throughout the time of coming back and reinventing the way that we do work, reorganizing ourselves, re-envisioning what the future is. And so as a supervisor, you know, you're going to have the responsibility in many ways of setting the tone and leading the way. And the way may not actually be clear for you, because at the same time that you have the responsibility of leading the way, that does not in any way stop all of the sharing, all of the responsibility, all of the needs that your staff are communicating to you. And so you are taking all of this in, and your staff is being impacted as well. And And so there is, through the process of change management, there is also loss. And the feelings that loss can bring up, those feelings, those emotions are going to be expressed differently by different staff people, right? And that is also going to be centered around their relationship with you as a supervisor, what you've modeled for them, what the state of your organization, this what the state of your organization was in before we got to the pandemic. And what I mean by that is, if your organization, or let's just say that your team, was in a place where they were working through some type of interpersonal tension and challenges, and then the pandemic hit and we have the stay-at-home order and those things were not resolved, that as we move forward and we go into this place of change, that those feelings are still there, that that experience has not been resolved. And so when we're going through a change management process and we're already having to deal with various stages of loss, our response to that loss, our ability to communicate how we feel about that loss, is going to be directly connected to the state of the relationship with you as a supervisor, but also with you as a team. So it's important to be aware of the culture of your team, interpersonally, relationally, and as Jim mentioned earlier, do whatever work you can do remotely in order to bring some type of resolution and healing to that process, so that when you get to the place where we need to have these conversations, as I was talking with the director just 2 days ago, and you know, this person already knows that there are going to be staff cuts, but they don't know what that looks like right now. And so they're carrying the weight of that, and they are having conversations with their staff as much as they possibly can without putting them in a place of fear, so that they can be prepared as well. Now, the reason they're able to do that is because they've already spent the last couple of years building those relationships, being transparent, being authentic, having hard conversations, and being able to receive hard feedback without any form of retaliation. And so recognizing that if you can identify what you've lost and what types of what that loss, what kind of grief that loss has brought to you, then you are better positioned to open up that dialogue for your staff so that they can actually communicate, this is what I'm afraid of losing. I don't know if I'm going to, and that should be able to happen both on the personal and the professional level. All right, so let's go ahead and let's see, can we go to the next slide? Yes, and this is the last slide. Where am I at on the time? Okay, great. So this just goes right back into what we were talking about. What have you lost that has been difficult to acknowledge? So being able to acknowledge that for yourself is helpful so that you can create the space for your staff to acknowledge that as well. What have you lost that's been a relief? You know, often supervisors and managers, it seems as though we're expected to be superheroes in some way, that we don't have feelings, and if we do, we need to manage those things. And the reality is that we are human as well, and it is okay for you, for me, for us to say, wow, I'm actually glad that we won't have this particular function anymore. Even if it's a function that your staff were really plugged into and really enjoyed. It's okay for you to be human. I'm not suggesting that you communicate that to your staff, but what I am suggesting is that you acknowledge the truth to yourself. And the reason that we want to do that is because you're taking in so much all of the time. You have responsibility all of the time. You have to think about not just yourself, but you have to think about the needs of these other humans that you're supervising all of the time, let alone your own family and your own personal needs and your extended family and the work itself. And so most of us have learned how to be a bowl where everything is just coming in, it's coming in, it's coming in. And unfortunately, during times of crisis, instead of finding a way to become a funnel where things come in, but we're also allowing enough to come out so that we can maintain enough space so that we're not actually finding ourselves in a place of deep anxiety or some other type of professional or personal trauma because we haven't taken care of ourselves. If we can become a funnel, then again, we have a much better chance of creating that space for staff, but also maintaining our own health and our own well-being. And so my question to you is, what is your highest need right now as a person? I know that you're a supervisor. I know that you're managing people, but what is your highest need right now? And I'd like for you to be honest with yourself. You don't have to put it in the chat box, but based on the need that you've identified, is that need being met? Now, I just saw something. Someone said feeling appreciated. I was thinking about this earlier. I try to do this, and Jen is so nice, right? She's not going to tell you guys because you can see her face. She won't say, no, KJ, you don't do that at all. But I definitely try to express my gratitude and my appreciation for all of my team members, but especially for Jen, because at the end of the day, I know who ultimately the board is going to be looking at, who stakeholders are going to be looking at, and that is her. And often our staff, how do I want to say this? Often staff don't necessarily take that approach, right? And that can be because of the hierarchy in the organization. Well, this is your responsibility. You signed up for this. You know, this is what you have to do. And all of that is true, but remembering that we are engaging with humans and that we need to feel appreciated in the work that we do is important as well. So I am I've got about 4 more minutes. So the next question is, how do you know when you're too full? I'll tell you how I know when I'm too full, when I've been a bowl instead of a funnel. I know that I'm too full when someone asks a question and I roll my eyes, whether they can see me or not, all right? Because for me, what I truly believe is that if someone's asking a question is because they really want an answer, right? But if I'm experiencing that question as being, it's irritating me for some reason, it's a question that maybe could have waited until later, then that's a clue for me that I know that I'm becoming too full because I no longer have the capacity of the grace and the compassion and the empathy needed in order to create that space for people to ask whatever questions that they want. Another clue as to when I am too full is snapping when I'm being asked the question, right? Now, I'm not snapping at colleagues, but I'm snapping at my wife, I'm snapping at my daughter. And thankfully, I'm in my office with my door closed, so you can't get any of their little comments of agreement in the fact that they know when I'm too full as well. What I would also like to point out is that your team will probably know when you're too full before you will, if you're not engaging in a regular practice of emptying your own bowl. Because your team spends the most time with you, they do check-ins with you, they're receiving information from you, you're giving them information, like there is this constant back and forth. And so that relationship, you know, team members learn how to identify just like our children do. And I am not being denigrating in any way, shape, or form as to the intellectual or emotional capacity of team members. But the parallel is that people that we spend a lot of time with learn our behaviors and they learn our body language. And so team members will adjust based on what they're picking up from you, right? And so if you take the time to empty your bowl, you have much more capacity so that your feelings and your needs are not negatively impacting your staff. And so how do we empty the ball? One of the ways that we get to do that is, instead of focusing on the fear that the new landscape has created for us, and I mean the professional and the personal fears, that what we can do is, it really kind of intersects with that sixth stage of grief in terms of what is the sixth stage? Oh, making meaning, right? Making meaning. Use your imagination. What are the good things that could come out of this? Take some time with your staff, and I actually have a couple of questions, and we'll send these, but ask staff to identify what are the positive lessons that they've learned during this time, both about themselves and about the work and about the organization. Brainstorm with your staff what organization or team functions have changed for the better. Clarify values, articulate any change in management style for the better. What has happened that's been positive, right? And then that open communication and giving employees a voice to speak the truth that they feel, and use imaginative ways to do that. It doesn't always have to be serious. So we have this opportunity to continue to find the light and to expand the light within the context of the work that we do. If we as supervisors and managers take the time to empty our bowls, become more of a funnel, and develop the type of reflection and self-awareness necessary so that we can take care of ourselves first, so we're in a better position to mitigate any negative impact to our staff. And so with that, we are now going to shift for the last few minutes and focus on the mission, vision, and values. And Jen is going to take that.
Sure. I will try to be brief. I do want to stay on for folks who have questions. And also want to really honor the amazing and vulnerable things that you all are sharing, even in the chat box, about the way the real and challenging emotions that are coming through for everyone, how trauma is really impacting the relationships that we have with one another. There's so much there, and we'll try to share out as much useful resources we can. But just hearing and from the comments that folks are making, and the range of sort of burnout and trauma and apathy and worry and fears that we're all carrying, just wanted to acknowledge the value in not only reconnecting to ourselves and the strategies that we need, and reconnecting to our people, the people who really give us energy and support, and also reconnecting to your mission, your vision, your values, your enduring why, both for you personally as well as for your team and your organization. This is hard work we're all engaging in, and we have to be able to hold on to the reason that we're doing that work in the first place. Who is it who needs you? And I do want to share, I know that folks who have participated in the Leadership Academy have heard this poem before, but I just keep thinking about it as I'm seeing folks' comments. I always get choked up when I read it, so I hope no one will make fun of me if I do. But there's something called "You Were Made for This" by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. I won't read the whole thing, but just a few notes, just what we're hearing from you all. Ours is not the task of fixing the entire world at once, but of stretching out to mend the part of the world that was within our reach. Any small, calm thing that one soul can do to help another soul, to assist some portion of this poor suffering world, will help immensely. It is not given to us to know which acts or by whom will cause the critical mass to tip toward an enduring good. There will always be times when you feel discouraged. I too have felt despair many times in my life, but I do not keep a chair for it. I will not entertain it. It is not allowed to eat from my plate. In that spirit, I hope you will write this on your wall. When a great ship is in harbor and moored, it is safe, there can be no doubt. But that is not what great ships are built for. With that, if folks do have the time to stay on, we would welcome the questions that you can share by chat And to be honest, I'm not sure if I know how to open things up for folks on the phone line, but I will work on that if I see anything coming through in that way.
Yes, thank you all for attending, and we totally understand if everyone just goes. This was a great hour. It was a great hour together for sure.
Appreciate the gratitude coming through as well.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you. It's really good to get that feedback.
And yes, the recording will be available, the transcripts, slides, and lots of articles and resources.
Yep.
And also, before folks sign off, if you're still there, want to promote the third session that we'll be doing in this series, which is planning for the future. That's something that came up as well. And that will be on Thursday, June 11th at 12 p.m. And that will be an opportunity for us to dig into some of the questions that KJ so helpfully posed around, how can we make meaning from this experience? And how do we make sure that the future that we write together looks different and is more just and equitable for ourselves, our teams, and particularly the communities that we work alongside.
Yeah, and some of the homework that you can do, and I say that in jest, it's not real homework, but some of the prep work you can do before that. Oh, that's number 4, isn't it?
What's that?
No, it is number 3. I was thinking it was number 4. But you can begin to identify, as I mentioned earlier, with your staff, what are the positives that have come out of this time? What are the functions and the operations that have been mandated to be streamlined? And in that process, you have found that whatever you've had to do to make that change is actually something that positively, again, brings, it's a positive impact. It's a practice that you don't want to lose. It's a practice that you'd like to sustain and maybe embed in the work that you're doing.
Yes, thank you, KJ. And there's a question about getting access to the previous session that we did. We'll make sure that that's included in the follow-up as well, so folks can watch part 1 at their leisure. These are all also eligible for CLE credit for the attorneys who've been participating. And really just want to say again, it cannot be overstated. You are not alone, and you are enough, and we really appreciate you and your partnership and the critical work that you're doing. Thank you so much. We're going to sign up.
Thank you.